The candidates tournament starts on the 17th of March, 8 players battling it out to see who will become the challenger to face Magnus Carlsen for the world title later in the year. I'm profiling all 8 players, and this time it's Alexander Grischuk from Russia. Well, what an exciting player he is. He qualified for the candidates by coming first in the FIDE Grand Prix series. He came second in Moscow and then won in Hamburg. He's been around for so long. He first entered the top 10 in the world in 2003. Incredible, at the age of 19. His highest rating was 2810, and that was in, well, the start of 2015. He was Russian champion in 2009, has had very strong results playing for the Russian team. Incredibly experienced. This is his 5th candidates tournament. He played in 2007, 2011, 2013 and 2018 as well. Last couple of candidates didn't do so well. 2013, 6.5 out of 14. 2018 also 6.5 out of 14. And that tournament, if you remember, he had +1 around about the halfway stage in the tournament and looking pretty well placed, but then drew a lot of games and lost his final 2. And I just wonder whether stamina might be a problem for him at the age of 36 this time around. He's the oldest player in the tournament. And I think that has something to do with his style of play as well. His style is enervating. He strives with every sinew to find really deep ideas in a position. And that often causes him to run into time pressure. That is a habitual problem for him. But you know, that makes him such an exciting player to watch because he really gives everything. There's no doubt that he'll have a strong impact on this tournament, whether he wins or not. He's capable of defeating absolutely anyone. I think essentially he's a classical player, although his games are often extremely complex. But I'd like to show you an end game that he played in Hamburg, defeating Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, and it shows the kind of technique he has. I mean, he's really a class act. So Grischuk with the white pieces, and queens have just been exchanged here. 3 against 3, so not many pawns on the board. Of course, that increases the drawing chances for the defender. But we can see that this knight is stuck way out on the edge of the board, blocking the A pawn. Of course, white needs to bring the king up. And now you'd expect the normal move here to be king to E3. In fact, Grischuk played king G4. But let's look and see what happens if he plays king E3 in this position. So kings come across, let's say here, and then king D6. And actually black is holding firm in this position. It's very difficult for white to make progress. So let's come back to this position. Instead of moving the king across this way, Grischuk played king G4. It's very interesting to see how he does this. So, well, first of all, Maxime pushed that bishop away. Came back with the king. So Grischuk has tied black's king to defending this pawn, but obviously there's no more progress that can be made there. So what is white going to do now? Well, here is when Grischuk produced a really brilliant idea. He forced the d pawn forward. bishop g2. So you can see that that pawn can't be protected, so it advances. Pawn has to be stopped advancing, so bishop f1. Now, this is an important moment, because if black can force the d-pawn forward again, then things will be critical. So let's just see what would happen if black played knight c5. Well, then the pawn advances, pawn to d3 from black, but here white can simply take the d-pawn and advance with a6, and the pawn rolls through. That's an important variation. That means that black just has to wait, basically. So Maxime played knight d2, attacking the bishop, which of course moved, and the knight returned to b3 to cover the a5 square. And now Grischuk just marked time for a couple of moves, no doubt gaining time on the clock. And now things started to happen. Bishop b5. So Maxime held back for a moment. He played f6. Now, interesting moment again, it requires some subtlety from white. Why did Grischuk force the d-pawn forward? Well, it means that now white's king can come across and try to round up that pawn. That's the difference. It's just moved a little bit further away from black's king. But what happens, I should say that Grischuk now played bishop f1. But what happens if the king moves over straight away? Well, this is very tricky. And you can see what might happen if white is careless here. d3 from black. The king comes over to stop the pawn. But now knight d3 attacks the a-pawn, but also threatens a deadly check on d4. So that d-pawn would have to be taken, and of course the game will end in a draw. So before Grischuk can bring the king over, he first of all loses a move and makes sure that that knight has to return to a5. So bishop f1. So he's just marking time for the moment. The knight has to return. And with the knight on a5 rather than b3, now he brings the king across to attack the d-pawn. It's a massive difference, and you can see that this king can't support the d-pawn now. If the knight returns to a5, then the king simply comes across to take the d-pawn and then goes for the knight. So now just a few little tricks right at the end. So obviously there's a barrier here. The knight and the pawn prevent white's king from coming over, but now we can advance the a-pawn. Gets tricky again, watch out. King comes across to stop the d-pawn. But take care, of course, white shouldn't take here because of knight b3 check, winning the a-pawn. But instead, the bishop comes back to control the queening square. And on the next turn, the pawn can be taken by the king. Well, actually, not quite, actually. You've got to watch out for this one. But, well, let's actually, Maxime resigned here, but let's just see exactly why. So what happens if the king comes over? Let's play king here. Well, first of all, we don't push because of knight takes pawn, and we don't play king takes pawn because of knight b3 check, but we can play bishop d1 to cover the b3 square, and then it's possible simply to capture the pawn, and then white is completely winning with the passed a-pawn. Even if the king comes across, well, it's no problem, but the bishop will support the a-pawn and the king will come across to attack the kingside pawns. But so anyway, that was the final position after bishop e2. Beautiful technique from Grischuk, and I think it just shows the care that he invests in a position, the depth that he goes into in a position as well. He's a hard worker, and that has consequences with his time pressure, but it can lead to absolutely brilliant chess at the same time. It'll be fun watching him.